Hi, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of the Infrastructure as Code podcast. I'm your host, Ohad Maislish. You can follow me on Twitter at DevOpsOhad, and you can follow our podcast at the IaC Podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest, Anders Eknert. How are you, Anders?
Hey, Ohad. It's great to be here. No, all good
Did
here.
I pronounce your name properly or
Yeah,
not? Not
it
almost.
it was all right. It was all right.
Perfect. Anders, tell us what you do, please.
Sure. So I work with Devrel at Styra, the company who created and maintained the Open Policy Agent project, or OPA. OPA it's an open source policy engine, which is kind of hosted under the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and it's been, I think, released in I think it's 2017, but it could be 16. uh, it was graduated uh, 2 years ago, so yeah, definitely one of the kind of flagship projects of the CNCF.
For sure, for sure. So we're going to talk about OPA. We're going to talk about Styra a little bit. We're going to
Yep.
talk about policy as code. When I explained what is OPA, I said that's the de facto standards today for policy as code. I'm very happy also that OPA is under CNCF. The license is free forever, which is amazing, and that's yet another reason that OPA gets a lot of attention from the community. So far, more than 8,000 GitHub stars for the OPA project. So for those who don't know, please explain not what is OPA yet, but what is policy as code.
Sure. So basically, policy as code is kind of this idea that a lot of the rules, or all of the rules in our systems, should be basically codified. So the way we traditionally work with policy is often that we've had some managers or a team of people who wrote the policy, and then it resides in a PDF document or a Microsoft Word document or something like that, and then it's kind of handed down to the people who are doing the coding, who will do their best to try and implement that as they see fit. So
So
what?
sounds like a good plan. Get a
Yeah, yeah.
document and that would work.
Nothing what could possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
There are many problems with that approach, of course, and it because there's a huge distance between like the people who actually make the policy and those who are later who are going to implement and maintain that policy in digital systems or microservices or infrastructure or whatever it might be. So policy as code is basically the idea that we should try and codify that policy, and we should not just codify, because like even if you kind of encode it in Java or .NET or whatnot, it's not treated as an idea or a concept of its own right. But basically, policy as code entails that you decouple policy and you treat it as its own entity, that you can test in isolation, that you can deploy in isolation, and that you can work with across team boundaries, organizations, and so on and so forth. So you can, in the same way that you decouple data and move that out of your application and into a database, you can think of policy as code doing the same thing for the rules of our system. So you kind of move them out of Java or .NET or Golang, and you treat those rules as you would with data in a database. It's a concept of its own right, and it could be either like managed by development teams, but I think in larger organizations, just as you might have like DBAs or database people, you might also have or find like security teams or even policy teams managing policy in these organizations.
Awesome. So let's give an example. Let's say I'm a DevOps engineer
Yep.
and I'm writing infrastructure as code. Let's say it's Terraform.
Sure.
Um, And basically, I can do almost anything with Terraform. I can write code that provisions CC2 instances, S3 buckets, VPCs, RDS, databases, on every infrastructure. I gave some examples in AWS, but Terraform is multi-cloud, so I can do whatever I want, provision a lot of infrastructure. So you're saying that maybe some of that infrastructure can be not according to policy. Let's maybe think about an S3 bucket that is public and
Yeah, yeah,
accessible by everybody in the world.
yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe that S3 bucket is intended to contain some sensitive information. So in the
yeah,
old days, before I execute the Terraform code, maybe I should have read some PDF that the CISO written, and
right.
I need to be careful to follow the rules
Yeah,
in the PDF. But now I have a much better option. Basically, I can write some code in policies code. I
yeah,
personally, honestly recommend OPA. It's the leading de facto standard for that. So I can write a rule, and we'll get to which language is that, and maybe some fun discussion about that in a moment. But let's
sure,
say
sure.
I'm writing some rules in OPA,
Yep,
and basically before I execute Terraform apply, I can go over the plan and
right.
validate that what I'm about to do doesn't violate the
Exactly.
rules
Yep.
myself or the security team uh, wrote in OPA. Did I explain that properly?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. I think you kind of you mentioned as well, like you can do whatever you want using these systems, and that's basically it's a freedom, it's liberating, but it's also from a security point of view, or it could be a cost point of view. That can also be a huge problem if you by mistake would deploy a very expensive cluster of instances or something, or of EC2 instances, or you like there's basically two aspects to it that I see. There's one which is like the security aspect. Uh, like we should not deploy insecurely configured infrastructure, if that's the domain we're talking about. Another one is of course like the human factor, like just doing mistakes. We all do mistakes, so that we can do anything we want. It doesn't really mean that we want to do things that we might not have intended. So I think there are, even though it sounds like like a paradox, like to limit what you can do is actually can be liberating, because you feel you don't have that kind of pressure where you know that a single mistake or a white space error in your YAML file is going to cost you like $100,000, or it's gonna lead to sensitive documents getting deployed to the public. So
Yep.
it's so yeah, it's basically what you'd use OPA for in that configuration.
Let me ask you a question. You know why I'm thinking now about Spider-Man?
No, I have no idea.
Spider-Man once said, uh, excuse me, I think it's Spider-Man dad told Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right, right. That's
So
true.
that
I'm not sure. I'm not sure Spider-Man was the original author of that quote, but but I'll play along.
it's definitely in the movie Spider-Man,
Yeah, yeah,
but that but now the DevOps engineers, similar to Spider-Man,
yeah,
they have uh, they have great power.
yeah, yeah,
They can easily write code that generates massive infrastructure. You no longer need to install physical pizza servers in your data center and switch some cables in your routers. You just write some YAML files, and
Yeah.
that's great power in the hands of so many DevOps engineers.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think like the whole DevOps movement is super empowering. Like
Mhm.
I remember when I started out in tech, where we had to physically walk over with our USB disks or sticks over to the operations side if we wanted to have like some piece of software deployed. And that was a process. Then they would have to review that, a process that could take like weeks just to get our software deployed. And now we can deploy not just that software, but we can actually deploy the servers, the databases, anything we might need, any dependencies we have. So yeah, definitely some great powers we've been handed
And with that comes
with that.
great responsibility,
Yeah.
because you can easily, as a DevOps engineer, create a lot of damage, either in cost or security or misconfiguration that causes downtime. And the more code you write and the more code your organization needs to maintain, it's
Yeah.
becoming more and more complex to actually force some rules in order to make sure you're not violating the policy. All
Yeah.
right, cool. So how do I do it with OPA? Can I write it in Python or in Node.js, or maybe something called Rego?
Yeah, that could be like I think, yeah. OPA comes with a policy language, a
Mhm.
declarative policy language, which is called Rego, which lets you declaratively define these rules. So the structure of a Rego policy is basically that of a real world policy. It's a set of rules. So you write your rules as you would with any other rule, but obviously adapted to the domain that we're in here. But it's a general purpose policy engine, so that's one point to kind of stress. It's not it wasn't built for any specific purpose, like infrastructure or authorization, but it can be used across the whole stack. Which I think like there's a whole bunch of policy engines. Some are good, some are not so good, but most of them they target one specific domain, like infrastructure, and they only do that. And I think like that's one trait of OPA, which is, I if not unique, at least it sets OPA apart from most of them. Is that OPA kind of covers the whole stack, and by doing so, it can find use cases across large organizations, and not just a single kind of infrastructure team or authorization team, but you'll find OPA every here and there in any large organization.
Interesting. But if I'm not an expert in Rego and I need some kind of a linter to help me with that, I've heard that you can help me with some linter, right?
Yeah, that was a leading question, but yeah, that's been like one of my kind of fun side projects, which turned into something more potentially useful for others as well. It's been a thing I've been working on for the past, yeah, I guess 6 months or so, because we talk about policy as guardrails, right? So as we said, like we want to avoid having to make these mistakes that could potentially be costly or insecure. Uh, Now, one thing that then becomes obvious, like, but who's guarding these guardrails? Like, how do you know that your policy is actually correct and doing what you think it's doing? Or how can we have the same sort of safety nets applied to policy as we did for infrastructure? And so that's basically the idea of Regal, the linter for Rego, that it's meant to catch common mistakes, issues that could hurt performance or security and so on. But it's also meant to be a learning tool for people new to Rego, so that for any mistake they make or any kind of violation that the linter finds, what we wanted to do is kind of present documentation, thorough documentation on that issue, so that people may actually learn, not just okay, like apply this and fix my issues, but you can actually use it to learn Rego and learn about not just bugs, but also things like best practices and style, kind of style guides, and so on and so forth.
Interesting. I have a very relevant question for the latest news. So we're recording this episode. It's now August 17th, uh, 2023. Exactly a week ago, HashiCorp announced a very big announcement regarding the license change. And it's going to change a lot of things. I would love to hear your thoughts about our expectations, predictions. What do you think is going to happen now with the community? What do you think about open source? What do you think about what HashiCorp just did?
Sure. So yeah, what I can say, like I'm an open source guy. I'm a huge proponent of open source. So I think like any kind of development or that goes in the opposite direction, where you go from an open source license to something more restrictive, is it's sad, really. I think ultimately, I think it's going to backfire. I think more open options are bound to emerge, and will likely be what people go with. But like, I'm sure they have their reasons. I'm sure they've done a ton of like back and forth thinking about this. But I think ultimately, I don't think this is going to be beneficial for them. I don't think it's going to be beneficial for the community. But yeah, time will tell, I guess. But I think one point to make here is, of course, uh, I think this hasn't really been a thing we have kind of stressed as much in the past. The value of these kind of foundations, like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Apache Software Foundation, the Linux Foundation, and so on, where there's not a single company or entity that has that kind of power, but a large constellation of many stakeholders and so on that has the copyright, and the license is guaranteed not to change. I
Yeah,
think we haven't really talked much about that in the past, but I think this move is guaranteed to kind of put the spotlight on that, on the value that adds.
definitely. And just reminding us all that the Open Policy Agent specifically is a project that doesn't belong to Styra. It belongs basically to the CNCF, so the license is well protected there,
That's right.
which is very important. I also want to mention that the new initiative uh, is up and running called OpenTF. Disclaimer: I'm one of the great people behind this initiative, and we really hope that this initiative will make Terraform open source this way or the other, either by HashiCorp reverting their decision and donating Terraform to something like CNCF, or we're gonna ask the help of the community and some other great companies and individuals to collaborate together on OpenTF as an open source alternative to Terraform. So I think this is going to be very interesting to see in the next few weeks, in the next few months, in the next couple of years, what's going to happen with open source, what's going to happen with the infrastructure open source with Terraform and with OpenTF. And it also means eventually the decision if OpenTF will be a fork of Terraform. Uh, Open Policy Agent might need to support a standard of Terraform, or maybe two forms of similar things of Terraform. But interesting things might happen that might affect other projects, such as OPA.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. That's, I think, like it's another kind of strength of OPA is it doesn't really rely on any specific technology like Terraform, or it's JSON in. Like you send in some JSON, make it this OPA makes a decision, and you get some JSON back. So whether it's like Terraform or OpenTF or another fork or another technology, it doesn't matter much to OPA, which I think has been like a key, or in part explains why it's so like prevalent in the tech landscape today.
So just to clarify, if I'm using Pulumi,
Yep.
can I use OPA?
You can use, yeah, I think there's at least a plugin for Pulumi. What you need to do, whatever, no matter what kind of application you're using, you need to have an output that is either JSON or YAML. That's what
Mhm.
OPA works with. So structured data, hierarchical data. Uh, if your application can be modeled to have that output, you can use it with OPA. And yeah, there is a plugin for Pulumi as well. I haven't used it yet myself, but I'd be excited to try it out.
Awesome, awesome. I think that's it for today, Anders. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks a
I
lot.
think it's I think it's really important for everybody here, our listeners, to um, embrace policy as code. It's uh, it's going to give you a lot of confidence in your changes, less human errors, less mistakes, less horrible mistakes. And if you are considering using policy as code, the first thing, in my honest opinion, that you need to take a look and implement is OPA. It's the de facto standard. It's real open source, not by a company, by CNCF. So that's my personal recommendation. And I'm very happy, Anders, that you've shared the Open Policy Agent story today with
Thanks a lot.
us.
I'm happy to
Uh,
be here.
Thank you so much. If you
Thanks.
enjoyed this episode, please follow us on Twitter. Please share with your friends at the IaC Podcast, theicpodcast.com. I'm Ohad Meislish. You can follow me at DevOps Ohad. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye bye.